Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. Have you ever wondered how these stories are made? Then maybe you should come past the stream. It's a daily stream where I stream myself making these stories. We can have a chit-chat, a chinwag. You can see how all this stuff is done. Some people call it magic, some people call it stuff. Anyways, the link will be in the description, and it'll be in the comments. But more importantly, on to the story. The Last Human Diplomat, written by maniacalmonocle. The greatest gift to give is hope. The growing hollow billboard said Terran on her way to work. It depicted a group of dirt-covered humans in tattered robes reaching up their arms towards a handsome-looking round tar with perfectly manicured horns and fresh, clean clothes. The billboard towered over the foot traffic on the station like a condemnation from the heavens. Reen could not help but look at it every morning on her commute. It sickened her. She did not look like that. The refugees she represented did not look like that. They were not dirty primates living in rubble. They were people struggling to tread water in a harsh political currents of the exchange. And it was Reen's job to help chart the course for them. While walking through the station, she couldn't help but feel a little lost at sea. A miasma of alien heads, tentacles, and eye analogues bobbed their way through the pedestrian hallways. A sense of otherness threatened to take hold of Reen. She repeated her mantra in her head. I belong here. I am as alien as they are to me. I am a representative of humanity. I belong here. I am as alien to them as they are to me. She made it to the embassy offices before most of the other ambassadors. She was the lone human in the cluster of self-important diplomats, but several others also shared her species' isolation. The Rancart ambassador was a member of a new species on the stage, newer even than humanity. They had made some small talk with Reen, but the fate of humanity always made people nervous. That, and Reen's many scars. Reen sat at her desk and enjoyed a cup of coffee. Commonalities of biology meant that many species of the exchange utilized mild stimulants, and some of those that did specifically used caffeine. It was not terribly hard then for Reen to convince local fabricators to design her some coffee grounds and a machine to brew coffee. The fabricators could not have imagined how important it would be for Reen's mornings and for her meetings with other human refugees. Little comforts like hot coffee went a long way in this alien land. Reen was early enough that she could enjoy her morning coffee without interference or interruption. The other ambassadors trickled into the annex, and Reen managed to greet some of them. Being seen, and more importantly, being seen as friendly, were fundamental to her job. She had to fight to undo the message of the advertisement on that billboard. Humanity needed help. But they weren't a huddling mass of miserables waiting for a mighty savior. Humanity was scarred and determined. They would not be at anyone's mercy ever again. Reen poured out her cold coffee as the Runtar ambassador finally arrived. She entered like a sovereign returning to their castle. Luck was the most senior ambassador and represented the most powerful nation in the annex, the Runtar Republic. Her importance dwarfed the other diplomats like a gas giant consuming a field of asteroids. Luck made her usual good mornings to the ambassadors that she was clearly working down today. Reen returned to her coffee to await her moment. The human ambassador's office was not sparse, but it was not lavish. She had 3 paintings on the walls. All of them faced one chair that she had set up for visitors. Reen's desk was a faux wood of a dark color with complicated patterns in the grain. She had been very specific with the fabricators, and even she didn't remember her precise reasoning for its design. It contrasted with the generally light metal walls and their obnoxiously clean surfaces. Reen liked to imagine that it gave her desk an impression of being something real placed into a simulated world. Reen was pretending to read through the messages as she waited for Luck to arrive. Luck would normally pop her bovine-like head through the door and ask some innocuous question, then depart. She did it nearly every day, making appearances, being friendly, being important. Luck was a born and bred diplomat. Among the ruined tar, that was likely literally true. Reen did not dislike her for it, but she found some of their habits clearly disingenuous. Reen hoped, somewhat naively, that among professional liars like the other diplomats, they could at least be honest with each other. But deep down, Reen understood that a diplomat's job was being a constant actor, putting on display what she wanted others to think of her people. Reen stirred when she heard Luck chatting up the Runecart ambassador that shared a wall with her office. Reen arrayed her desk to have a thin layer of datasheets and printouts. Luck popped her head into the doorframe and spoke through the ambassador's translator. It expressed tone and inflection perfectly, but its disconnect between the lips sound could never be removed. "Morning, Reen. How's the atmosphere?" "Not too." Reen interrupted her. "Yes, fine, Luck." Her voice was sweet and her tone endearing. She spoke the Runtar High language well. "I'm glad you stopped by, actually. Are we still good for dinner tonight with the representative from Yonk College?" Luck kept her translator set to Reen's language. "No, yes. Of course. I am glad you reminded me. I'd have been late again. You know how the Duro ambassador is with his lunches. They always seem to stretch between 2 meals. Luck dipped her large head almost imperceptibly as she continued her rounds through the office. Reen was quite pleased with herself. It took careful tact and foreplanning to get a bow from the Runtar. That slight head dip wasn't exactly a bow, but Reen considered it a victory nonetheless. The dinner with the Yonk representative had been extended to Luck, not Reen. Reen had been maneuvering for weeks to get her invitation. 4 ambassadors were going, including Luck and herself. The Yonk representative had been unclear in his invitation and had used a formal plural pronoun instead of a singular one when addressing the Honorable Runtar ambassador. Luck, ever the opportunist, had used it as political leverage to lord the invites over the others in the annex. It was likely that any guests brought would be interpreted as servants by the Yonk. The situation had numerous social layers to it, but Reen needed to be in that room with the representative. Reen set herself to actually reading and responding to her messages. Her position as ambassador was tenuous, to say the least. For one, she didn't represent a nation or a state. The rest of the workday was relatively relaxed. Reen took calls with refugee representatives across the exchange and worked with suppliers to get relief packages shipped to where they were needed. Luck had disappeared around midday to lunch with the Duro ambassador, who had afforded himself an isolated office away from the ambassador complex. It was clear his separate office was meant to convey prestige and put his Duro clan on a level with the Imperium, but Reen just thought he was an ass. With about a standard hour left to the station's main work shift, most of the ambassador's complex was empty. They usually worked lax schedules. Working too late into the night could convey that you were busy, and a busy ambassador looked stressed. And what would an ambassador be stressed about? It did not look good to be stressed. Oh yes, what could I possibly have to be stressed about? Reen thought as she sighed and reclined in her chair. Everything's cheery and fine for a human being these days. In her mind, her inner thoughts oozed with a vicious sarcasm. Her final task of the day was not logged anywhere, and she had been careful not to even write it down on the corner of a report anywhere. She packed up her things early, which to the other ambassadors was late, and locked up her office. Only the Rancart ambassador was still there when she departed, and they will likely be there well into the night, as their people tried to avoid war with the Imperium. Reen made her way carefully and casually to the ritzy part of the station, known for its exotic foods. She walked through the front entrance of an ancient-looking establishment, and then straight into the back. The staff knew her, and some even waved as she came to pick up her order. The restaurant served a wide clientele, but specialized in food tailored to a species near the core. This was one of the few places on the station that felt truly multicultural. It was a widely known secret that the chef was a Chiran. If people on the station had any issues with him breaking from traditional caste roles, they didn't voice them. Reen found familiar faces in the kitchen. She'd made herself a regular here, and might have gotten a handful of Vartes line cooks addicted to coffee. A sous chef saw her and shouted something, and Reen did not recognize. Not soon after, the head chef, Micta, emerged. His facial tentacles moved in a pattern that Reen had come to recognize as a sign of joy. The two hugged tightly, and Micta replied in Imperium Standard, "You showed up so late, I barely have time to eat with you before your dining room fills up." Reen laughed and replied, "Late? I told you I'd come by 7, and it's 5. Micta's vocalizer laughed back. "Come over here, I got your order ready." He nearly waddled as he walked. His age was evident even across the species border. Reen did not know what differentiates a young Chiran from an old one, but Micta nearly shouts his age at the universe with his actions. "I might have some time to make ya some gunbutt soup," he offered. Reen raised her hands in defense and protest. "I have a diplomat dinner tonight. I can't show up full again." Micta waved her protest away. "Ah, those Diplocar cooks don't know what they're doing. You should eat something edible while you can." Micta approached a cook and sent them off to collect Reen's order. Before she could protest further, he began making something at the stovetop. "You should know you're not getting out of here without eating something." Someone found her a stool, and Reen sat down to watch the master at work. I surrender. But please, nothing too big. I have to at least pretend to enjoy these diplomats' hospitality." Micta grumbled something that was likely another jab at the Diplocore. Micta expertly skinned and gutted a fish with more eyes than Reen was comfortable with. He used his 4 arms to their full extent and was soon grilling a pungent collection of fish and vegetables. His arms were a flurry as they added spice and sauce. He finished by scooping the slurry into a flatbed cone. He said nothing as he handed it to Reen, and his eyes demanded that she eat it. She bit into the collection and closed her eyes in bliss. The spice was upfront but not all too encompassing. Whatever species of fish it was, its meat was perfect. It all crumbled together in her mouth as she chewed. Some of the alien vegetables crunched beneath her teeth, while others formed a flavorful mash. She was foolish to ever resist Micta's cooking. If Micta could smile, he'd be beaming like an old grandfather. He turned to Reen's order and examined each item with a keen eye. The staff had learned their lesson from previous outbursts, and none of it was sent back. Micta took an extra moment to look over the loaf of human-style bread. He showed the full length of the baguette to Reen and asked for her approval. He behaved as if she was an expert, but Micta never missed an opportunity to master a new culture's food. He looked through the final bag and pulled a long, thin fish out of it. "Now be careful with this one. If you cook for any yonks, you have to be careful about deveining it." He turned the fish over in his hands, inspecting it carefully. "Let me get it for you." He moved to grab a knife, but Reen stopped him. "I can handle it, don't worry. I'm not cooking for any yonks with this. I just wanted to try it." Micta looked unsure, but returned it to the bag. "Be careful still. I don't know how it would affect humans if you cut it up wrong." "I'll be extra careful with it," Reen assured him. "You worry too much, Micta." She looped her arms through the bags and took another bite of her flatbread cone. "And thank you again for the food." Micta switched from doting to adoring. "It's called a I will make you many more when you come to dinner here tomorrow." Reen laughed, but agreed to come back for dinner. Micta shooed her out like a child late for school. Reen was running late. She considered taking the station tram back to her apartment, but stuck to the pedestrian walkway. The tram would keep a record of where she got on and where she got off. So she took the longer route, sticking to the pathways and sidewalks until she finally arrived at her apartment in one of the mid-rings of the station. Her apartment was a stereotypical ambassador or politician's home. Wooden surfaces had become the recent wealth display across the exchange, and Reen had followed along. In her case, all of the woods was false, with metal or tile breaking up the monotony. Unlike co-workers, Reen wasn't an ambassador for a sovereign nation. Her salary, her entire position, was funded through donation. As much as Reen hated the condescending billboard from her morning commute, the donations it brought in funded her job. If the exchange didn't pity humankind, they wouldn't throw money at refugee relief. Without that petty money, Reen couldn't buy Micta's exotic fish. She set to work carefully. She put all of the produce in a cooler and organized the meats by the prep needed. She set aside a small collection of green vegetables along with the toxic fish that Micta had warned her about. She turned on a stovetop and quickly sliced a few cubes of greens. She didn't know what the veggies were called, but they were close enough to cucumbers for her palate. She let all of the constituent parts of her dinner sit in her frying pan on low heat. Her main objective became the deveining of the toxic fish. The creature had a set of 6 eyes that Reen tried not to look at as she cut off its head. The thing wasn't a fish by Earth's taxonomy, but translation was already tricky enough without scientific pedantry. The fish had a large chitin plate that ran the length of its back. She ran a thin knife between the plate and the flesh beneath. A web of membranes fought back at her knife. She was careful as she went, cutting as close to the chitin as she could manage. As Reen neared the tail of the fish, she was tempted just to rip it off the chitin. She was diligent, however, and carefully cut away the last few tendons connecting it with the fish's flesh. Her reward was a disgusting view of the fish's red and purple meat. All along its thin back muscles ran deep blue veins, filled with toxins that would kill a yonk in a minute and make human feverish. She had practiced this next task several times. She put on her sanitary gloves before she started. The deveining went even slower than the shelling. Her hands cramped before she could finish. The veins resisted careful extraction, wanting to tear in halves and spill their deadly contents. In the end, she had a handful of loose veins and viscera. She took a portion of the toxic veins and tossed them into a composter. After cleaning her knife, she chopped the remaining fish into rough fillets. She threw the fillets into a frying pan with a little regard for seasoning, while she collected the remaining veins into a mortar and pestle. She ground down the viscera until she was left with a pinky-sized pale blue mash. This was finally deposited in the sealed plastic baggie that Reen pressed flat into a coin shape. She made a show of trying to finish her staged dinner. She burned the ends of the fish meat and took a few bites that were eventually spit out. Most of the dinner ended up in the composter along with the previously discarded veins. She threw her knives and the rest of her kitchen implements into a sterilizer. Hopefully, if anyone got to this point, they'd see what she intended them to see. Reen had cooked herself a somewhat exotic dinner. The dress she had chosen was a reserved maroon pantsuit that was maybe a half size too loose along her waist. The designer was over a century dead, and Reen didn't know of any seamstresses that could fix it for her. Her constructed appearance combined the vague impression of professionalism and a hint of enticing mystery. Or, at least, she believed it would with a human crowd. For all she knew, she might be the spitting image of some yonk chicken analog. She hid the disc of poison in a concealed pouch along her hip. The ancient designer had been gracious enough to stitch in pockets. Reen looked at her data slate and saw that she was definitely going to be late. She sprinted to the tram station near her apartment block. The wave of alien passengers pressed against each other as she pushed her way into the train car. As 1,000 appendages pressed into a confined metal tube, that sense of otherness threatened to overtake her. The small disc of poison became her anchor. I belong here. I'm as alien as them, as they are to me. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnold, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Asrigal. Thank you very much.